Many in the US seem to see Robinson as a beacon of truth, who's been pivotal to exposing this evil.
And I think that's why Robinson is such a complex figure, because there's so many layers of lies surrounding absolutely everything that's part and parcel of this complete bloody catastrophe that it's very difficult to get to the truth.
I believe, as Nigel Farage does, that he's now so toxic and so discredited that he is in fact being used with the precise aim of discrediting those who do want to expose the truth.
The certainty that anyone who would blow the whistle would be subject to the worst possible of cancellations by the woke mob. And that this is partly why I have some sympathy for Tommy Robinson.
Robinson's criminal record is highly extensive and very unpleasant. So, for 20 years, he's been breaking the law. He attacked an off-duty police officer. He led a hooligan group of football thugs in a brawl involving 100 people. He headbutted a man in Blackburn. He used a false passport to get round the fact he had criminal convictions in the UK to get into America and was caught. He perpetrated mortgage fraud, over £160,000. He was then found in contempt of court twice, and he was found guilty of stalking a journalist and accusing a partner of being a paedophile. This is not a nice guy.
Yeah, well, I've been following the rape gang scandal for, I would say, 15 years, but the primary source of information for me in Canada has been Tommy Robinson, and his insistence on pursuing this come what may. It might be wonderful for us to presume that the person who does that would also be of unimpeachable ethical character on all dimensions simultaneously, but we've seen the silence of people with unimpeachable characters in the face of this onslaught, and it doesn't bode well for them.
If they make it all about Tommy Robinson, a lot of people will just go, well, he's awful, therefore we shouldn't listen to anything he says. But actually what he says about the rape gangs then and now has turned out to be true.
Piers Morgan just had the most important conversation I think I've ever heard regarding Tommy Robinson. The reason why I think this interview is pivotal and so important is because they have a genuine good faith conversation. I've seen Piers Morgan in the past have what I would call a bad faith conversation in regards to Tommy Robinson. But because he's talking to Jordan Peterson, he is forced to have a good faith conversation. As somebody that is still trying to understand who the character of Tommy Robinson is and has done that publicly on this channel, I heard things that I'd never heard before about Tommy Robinson. Whether you're outraged or not about Tommy Robinson and the things he says, whether you're a supporter or a detractor, I believe this is a very important video for you to pay attention to. Let's get into it. For those of you that don't know, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and UK mixed, grew up mostly in the UK. I'm a son of a legal immigrant that was a teacher in this country for more than 20 years. My grandfather also fought in the Second World War and was a prisoner of war for 2 years. There is no getting around it. I'm British and African mixed, and I don't know how to separate any of those things. In recent years, I've been unhappy about the state of the United Kingdom. And after forming a relationship with my partner Medina, I decided to try a completely new lifestyle and move to Uganda to see how life could be in a different environment. I've been watching on the sidelines from this new vantage point in Africa, everything that's been going on regarding multiculturalism in the UK. And being a product of multiculturalism, I am very interested in this subject. So let's get into this interview and see if we can improve our understanding of where things lie regarding Tommy Robinson, the sex scandal, and everything surrounding that subject matter in the UK political sphere.
And for the avoidance of doubt, Tommy Robinson, like I said, he's not in jail, as so many in America in particular seem to think, for his whistleblowing about the rape gangs. He's in jail for contempt of court, a crime he's committed many times. It's a crime in America as well. You can be jailed for contempt of court in America. People have been. But many in the US seem to see Robinson as a beacon of truth, who's been pivotal to exposing this evil. I don't see him like that. I believe
that obviously he's referring to Elon Musk's tweets, where Elon basically has been promoting some of the things that Tommy Robinson has been saying over the past week or so. Actually made a video about that a few days ago. It seems like Piers Morgan is trying to kind of put Americans straight, or put the public straight, about who Tommy Robinson is.
Who's been pivotal to exposing this evil. I don't see him like that. I believe, as Nigel Farage does, the leader of the Reform Party in the UK, that he's now so toxic and so discredited that he is in fact being used deliberately as a kind of opposition sacrificial lamb, with the precise aim of discrediting those who do want to expose the truth.
Obviously, Nigel Farage has come out and said that Tommy Robinson is not welcome in Reform UK Party. Why would he do that? When I first heard that, I didn't know why Farage would say that, right? So I guess Piers is going to put the argument forward of why that is in this interview.
Make it all about Tommy Robinson, a lot of people will just go, well, he's a sacrificial lamb. He's now so toxic and so discredited that he is in fact being used deliberately as a kind of opposition sacrificial lamb, with the precise aim of discrediting those who do want to expose the truth. If they make it all about Tommy Robinson, a lot of people will just go, well, he's awful, therefore we shouldn't listen to anything he says. But actually what he says about the rape gangs then and now has turned out to be true.
And that has been what I've observed. People have been saying Tommy Robinson is a racist, Tommy Robinson is so vile, and that takes away basically from whatever the sex scandal, grooming gang story is. And I've always been of the stance, well, it doesn't matter who the messenger is if the message is actually true. We should be investigating that. We should be having an independent inquiry. It seems like there are now many sources, not just Tommy Robinson, bringing this forward. So let's have it out. Let's bring out the stats. Let's look at what happened. Let's look who's responsible. Let's look at if there's anything that can be done to improve this, so these types of scandals don't happen again in the future. I don't care what Tommy Robinson's criminal record or history is, if that story is true.
And the truth must come out. Lessons must be learned. Those accountable must be punished. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, must, as I posted earlier today, order a full, no-holds-barred, independent national inquiry.
I agree with that.
Well, joining me to discuss all this is a psychologist, author of We Who Wrestle with God, the co-founder of the Peterson Academy, my good friend Jordan Peterson. Jordan, great to have you back on Uncensored. You contacted me because you don't agree necessarily with my views of Tommy Robinson. I think we share a lot of views, probably even with him, about the rape gang scandal. There's much to discuss here.
And that's why this conversation is very important, because you've got two people who don't necessarily agree, but are willing to have a good faith conversation. Like I said, I don't think Piers Morgan has had good faith conversations in the past, but now he's forced to have one because he respects Jordan Peterson and he's not intellectually strong enough to kind of play any like debate games with Jordan Peterson. He's going to have a good faith conversation.
First of all, the rape gang scandal itself, with your expert psychologist eye, what has happened here to make so many people so afraid to call it out for what it was, which was predominantly British Pakistani Muslim men abusing, raping, drugging young, often underage, white English girls?
All right, so let's think of 4 bins of complexity that surround the issue. Okay, so the first is the racial divide that typifies the crimes. So it's Pakistani Muslim immigrants and white working class young girls. So there's a racial, ethnic, and religious divide that is part and parcel of the crime. Then there's a class issue in the UK with regards to the victims and also the whistleblowers like Robinson. Then there's the meta problem of the difference between Islam and Christianity. The additional problem that psychopathic sadists use religious justification to camouflage and justify their crimes. Then there's the problem of open borders and immigration and the progressive presumption that all cultures, no matter their difference, are valuable in their diversity and can be integrated peacefully into society at, what would you say, an indefinite rate. Okay, and then to add another level of complexity, there's the politicking between the progressives and the right wing with regards to all the issues I just described. Okay, so that's like an absolute bloody rat's nest. And there's lies in every one of those, along every one of those dimensions that are extraordinarily deep and pervasive.
And that's why we've got to have an open mind. We've got to be willing to listen to all angles of this argument, because there are lies everywhere and we want to know the truth.
And so I was very apprehensive about this discussion with you, Piers, because there's almost no way of weaving, let's say, our way through this without making egregious errors.
Yeah.
So, okay, so
we all have to accept when we make a mistake. And like I say on the channel, if there's something that I've done or said that is incorrect, I should be willing to open my mouth and say that was wrong. I'm changing my view. I was wrong about this. I stand corrected, as we all should.
well, let's, on the psychological side, let's point out two primary realities. The first is that sexual misbehavior even of the sadistic kind is to be expected. You might think about it as an aberration from the norm, but it's only an aberration when the norm is deep and profound and the consequence of many years of socialization and centuries of history. Like the default position for an unguarded woman worldwide and throughout history has been rape target. That's the norm, not the civilized conduct that generally obtains between men and women, even in public.
One thing that I would like to note about this is that you can say what you like about UK. You go around other places around the world, there's not too many places where young women walk around at night on their own, unaccompanied. You would probably not be comfortable in most countries letting your daughter or a young girl that you love walk around at night unaccompanied. Whereas the truth is that is relatively normal place. I see it relatively comfortably in London, you know, on a regular basis. Like
on the streets in the West. And then there's the additional issue that resentful, psychopathic, sadistic, low status, desperate men will use any excuse whatsoever to get access to women. So those are just some of the ugly realities that we have to contend with to weave our way through this complete bloody mess.
And there's men like that all over the world also.
Yeah, and it is very complex. But at the heart of it, you also have a massive cover-up where people from local government, from the main federal government, police, social workers, almost everybody whose job it is to protect particularly vulnerable young girls in society. I mean, I can't think of a group you would more want to protect or throw the force of the establishment protective arm around than vulnerable young girls. At every level, they conspired to not just fail them, but they failed them in many cases deliberately because they didn't want to, in their eyes, let off a tinderbox, a racial tinderbox, by telling people, hey, you know what's happened here? A very large number of British Pakistani Muslim men have been systematically raping young, damaged white girls, in some cases not damaged before they got their hands on them, for a very, very long time, and we've done very little about it. And they didn't want to say this because they were terrified that there would be a huge scandal around that, and there would be a lack of, there would be unrest in communities and so on, which to me seems the ultimate immoral cowardice.
And that is the thing that I just cannot fathom, why there would be such a cover-up in Britain in modern times, in my lifetime, the last 10, 20 years. Why would they cover this up? It just seems so immoral and so against everything that the establishment says they are.
Well, okay, I think there's two things going on there, Piers. The first is the certainty that anyone who would blow the whistle would be subject to the worst possible of cancellations by the woke mob. And that this is partly why I have some sympathy for Tommy Robinson, let's say, because it is definitely the case that to take a stand against this is to make yourself a target for the worst sort of calumny and legal action. So the threat is real, and the cancel culture types are very good at identifying individuals and bringing reputation savaging to bear on them in an extremely effective way. So people had reason to be afraid. Now, I'm not saying that that fear justifies their silence or their complicity, but we have to be clear about the fact that their fear is real.
Yeah.
Now, there's another aspect to that that's even uglier than this, I think, Piers, which is that, look, we know that when you destabilize a community with rapid transformation, this could be, let's say, with regards to the green agenda that makes energy more expensive, or to uncontrolled immigration, any rapid change with economic consequences demolishes the lower rungs of the socioeconomic hierarchy most particularly, right?
Poor people are always the biggest victims. In whatever injustices are done at a large scale, poor people are always the largest victims.
Right? They say that when the aristocracy catches a cold, the working class die of pneumonia, and that's a deep biological and sociological truth. Now, one of the corollaries of that, and this is where it gets ugly, is that it's very easy for the elite, especially in a relatively class-based system like the UK, to virtue signal about their progressive openness and their cosmopolitan sophistication, while sacrificing the genuinely poor and dispossessed, so the English working class.
And we see this with all of the arrests for things people have said on Twitter, because political incorrectness and rudeness trumps, like, is the bastion of their position nowadays as the most progressive country in the world, or the Western developed, non-savage country. We uphold the feelings of each other, yet at the same time you let a scandal like this proliferate for years, and it just totally undermines all of that woke nonsense. It totally undermines all of that political correctness posturing that the elites and the upper classes, the controllers of this country, have been pushing so hard for so long.
To the depredations of whatever virtue signaling policy happens to be conveniently at hand. And so partly it's cowardice, partly it's fear of say, being singled out and canceled, but it's also partly willingness on the part of the elite to sacrifice the genuinely downtrodden and poor to their moral presumptions, to their costless virtue signaling. And that happens consistently throughout the West now. Almost all the progressive agenda, including the open immigration policies, are absolutely devastating to the people who can least afford to be devastated. So I would say the elite in Great Britain made a choice to sacrifice the children of working class Brits to the moral grandstanding of their progressive elitism.
That's a big sin. That is a big sin.
And that's in addition to the absolute cowardice that, had some justification in real fear, because there was a cost. And I think that's why Robinson is such a complex figure, because, you said in your introduction, you're not very happy about his documentary. And I don't know what to make of that documentary, the one that, as you said, savaged the reputation of the Syrian immigrant. There's so many layers of lies surrounding absolutely everything that's part and parcel of this complete bloody catastrophe that it's very difficult to get to the truth.
Yeah,
one of the things that we can say is that...
Yeah, on Robinson, here's what I would say.
Yep.
I watched your interview with him. I've interviewed him myself. He's not he's not stupid. He's very articulate. He speaks in a very passionate manner. But the things I have a problem with Robinson about are this. One is, I don't think people in America, it seems to me, in the last week, since Elon Musk did a torch to all this, and in my opinion, probably did us a massive favour as a country, notwithstanding a lot of the things he said, I think, have been quite problematic in terms of the vitriol on certain individual members of parliament. For example, he targeted one female member of parliament, Jess Phillips, who then got immediate death threats. People are now being arrested in connection with those death threats. It is serious because 2 members of parliament in Britain have been murdered in the last 10 years by people who didn't agree with their opinions. So I think there's a responsibility that Elon has, which he has to tread carefully about in how he says things about public officials. However, he's absolutely right to say that this is a scandal that hasn't gone away, that the cover-up has never been properly investigated, that people were never held properly accountable, that no one has gone to prison who was at any level of responsibility for trying to protect these girls. None of them were properly held to account. All of that, I think, is a valuable thing that Elon Musk has now made everyone think about properly. And the only answer to me is a full independent national inquiry to get to the bottom of all of it and then to hold people properly accountable.
That is a big admission by Piers Morgan there, because he started off by saying, you know, Elon is said some negative things that may have consequences. But the bottom line is, it's a good service that has happened. You know, sometimes things are a double-edged sword and there's no right and wrong path exactly. There's going to be compromises depending on what path you go down. So when Elon highlights all of that stuff, you're doing it for the greater good. You're doing it for the fact that there has been this huge cover-up, and there may be political ramifications and other ramifications that none of us would want to see, but that is not trumped by the evil cover-up that has been made. And we have to put these things into a hierarchy and into a perspective. Whatever Elon Musk tweeted, whatever Tommy Robinson has done, I think should be secondary to the scandal that has been covered up. That is the main priority target that we need to get to the bottom of. And anyone involved in that scandal that has blood on their hands needs to be ousted, needs to be called out, and needs to be held to account. Whether that's criminal, whether that's financial, whatever the things that can be made to bear on that situation for justice, or the closest thing we can get to it, that should be the priority here.
And then to hold people properly accountable. My problem with Robinson being the so-called hero of this is that many people in America, and I'm not saying you're one of them, I'm sure you now know a lot more about him perhaps than you did before, but you know, Robinson is not in prison right now for anything to do with the gang rape scandal. He's in prison because of this movie he made, this documentary, as he put it, as a journalist, which I don't think he is. He's someone who made a film.
That's not fair. That's not fair to say that he's not a journalist. He's clearly a journalist. Whether you like the way he does his journalism might be another thing. Whether he does it in a conventional way is another thing. But nowadays, everyone can be a journalist if they want to talk publicly online and on social media about the issues that grieve them. And when you get a following, when people follow you, it's because you're saying something that has resonated with a large group of people. That makes what you say and what you do important. So he is a journalist, and that is something that I reject from Piers Morgan right there.
After he was convicted in a court by a judge of being seriously defamatory to a young Syrian refugee boy who he tried to make out was the villain of a bullying incident that went viral because there was a clip, when in fact he was the victim. The judge made it crystal clear in his very extensive ruling, which I read at length last night. It's many, many pages. It's extremely detailed. It includes his analysis of all the witness statements, what the school have told him, all the documentary evidence, everything. There's no doubt that the judge's conclusion is that the victim was the victim, that the boy who did the bullying in the video that went viral, Bailey, who was befriended by Tommy Robinson, that he was also a victim in many ways of the firestorm that erupted after this story went viral. He also made it clear that Bailey had not had a racial motivation that he could establish against a Syrian refugee, which had been the original narrative that went out there. So it was very educational, this judgment, in many ways. He get into the bottom of what had happened. But he also made clear that the 5 witnesses which Robinson brought to court to try and support his his proposition that this Syrian refugee was the bad one of the two, that all of their evidence was lacking in credibility. In fact, he called it, he said some of them had clearly invented their testimony completely. And he was very scathing about the quality of the evidence of everyone that Robinson brought there. And in the end, he found Robinson guilty of defamation. He fined him £100,000 and I think £700,000 in legal costs. And he made it crystal clear to him, do not repeat these lies about this Syrian refugee boy, Jamal, again. And all that Robinson did was go away and repeat them to absolutely everyone, including in this film, to wide audiences. And they are ultimately lies. As
That shows that he is a journalist, by the way. What I would say is that from what I hear from the Tommy Robinson side, they still refute everything that that judge said. I'm not willing to go that far. I think if they've looked at the evidence and they've come to this conclusion, we have no choice but to accept that conclusion, that the evidence has been looked at and that whatever the ruling is the best to the ability of the court system's knowledge of how things actually unfolded. And if Robinson was told, sorry to the Robinson fans, but if he was told not to repeat it and he did, then you have to expect that the government, that the system will throw the hammer down on you. Now, when you speak against the system, it's always been the case that if they want to make an example of you, they will. And so that's what they've done. That's how it works. That's how it works. So, you know, this is information that I was not so privy to until this interview, which is that the judge has, you know, gone through the information and there's been an extensive report that I don't know how many people have actually read. I mean, I haven't read it, but I'm willing to go with the courts on this one and say that, you know, Tommy was in the wrong if he did not follow the instructions of the judge.
Proven in a very forensic and extensive court case held by a very eminent judge. So my problem with Robinson is that he's trying to portray himself as this great martyr who's been, you know, had lawfare put against him by the British establishment to silence him, when in fact it was his refusal to be silenced and to repeat lies about this young Syrian refugee boy, which is why he's in prison. Secondly, my problem with him, Jordan, if I'm honest, is I don't know how many Americans...
But he has been put in prison, in a top category prison for that crime, which is not usual. But, you know, that's the part where they're making an example of him. And I think it's okay to call that out and say, look, people that have been done for this type of crime don't usually get put in this type of prison.
Or people in America who've been following this, because I see all the stuff on social media, they just don't seem to understand that Robinson's criminal record is highly extensive and very unpleasant. So, you know, for 20 years, he's been breaking the law. He attacked an off-duty police officer. He led a hooligan group of football thugs in a brawl involving 100 people. He headbutted a man in Blackburn. He used a false passport to get round the fact he had criminal convictions in the UK to get into America and was caught. He perpetrated mortgage fraud, over £160,000. He was then found in contempt of court twice for turning up at court cases involving people who had been accused of committing these heinous crimes of grooming and raping these girls, nearly wrecking the trials because he was saying defamatory things in public outside the courtroom. And then we come to the refugee story, in which he's now back in prison again, and he was found guilty of stalking a journalist and accusing her partner of being a paedophile. This is not a nice guy. This is a pretty repellent human being who also simultaneously has been right to bang on for many years about the scandal of the rape gangs. So yes, he's complicated, but at the heart of it is somebody who I think also, just finally on the point of Robinson, 2 points I'd make. One, I think he's done this, he's monetized his hatred of Islam. It has warped, in my view, all his so-called journalism, activism, whatever he wants to call it, because it's always skewed against Muslims. It's never fair and balanced in any way. And I think that's what tipped him over the edge with this story of this boy at the school. And, you know, on that, the bully, the alleged bully, was actually kicked out of the school before this ever got made public by the media. So they'd already had their own investigation, concluded he was guilty not just of that, but a litany of other similar offences. So he was thrown out. But I also think that Robinson, and this is a slightly more complicated and insidious thing about him, I think he's been deliberately amplified and promoted by the people who have most to lose from exposure, justified exposure, because if they can make Robinson the guy that is trying to expose them, he's so discredited, particularly in the UK, that people won't take it seriously. And that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been more action, is because the leading whistleblower is Tommy Robinson. So I see problems in all of this with him, but notwithstanding, as I said at the start, I do think he's been absolutely right that this has been a massive scandal which has shamed the country, and that it needs proper national inquiry to get to the bottom of it. So that's where
I think something that's come to my mind, which is the Trump election versus Kamala Harris. Basically, there's people that will find the things they don't like about Kamala, or find the things they don't like about Trump, and then that will be their whole basis to vote for or vote against whichever candidate they want. If it comes to reproductive rights and whatever Donald Trump has done about that, that is so egregious to some people that they can't possibly vote for him because of that. Whereas some people are like, well, I don't see that as such a big issue. I see the prosecution record of Kamala being a much more insidious issue, so I can't vote for her. And so what you have is Britain is divided by this kind of polarization, because there's a group of Brits that probably don't care too much that Tommy Robinson has this extensive criminal record, and they just will never see anything past the grooming gangs and the elements in the Muslim community that want Sharia law, and that's it for them. They don't care about any other details. And then there's the other side that are like, this guy has a criminal record. Why should we listen to him? He's not of reputable character. So with my position, I don't think that's the proper way to look at this situation. I think the proper way to look at it is to feed these issues into, or create a hierarchy around these issues, and then deal with them individually. So I can say Tommy Robinson is right about X, Y, and Z, but he's wrong about X, Y, and Z, and that's okay. I don't have to, I don't have to agree with everyone on every single point, but this is the hierarchy. Number one, grooming gangs. Tommy Robinson is right about the grooming gangs, and therefore this investigation needs to go ahead, and then we get the outcome of justice, hopefully, that should be done. And then at the same time, if Tommy Robinson does break the law, if he does things that are wrong, if he does things that are egregious or incorrect, or he tells lies, we should be willing to say, okay, fine, he's also done these things, and those are not good things about the guy. So we should be able to hold those things both in our minds. Now, what I think about is, sometimes you see on the news that like a drunk driver has killed someone, and they'll put the worst mugshot of the person up, and they'll say he was a drunk driver and he was a terrible person and he's killed this person. And that kind of person is like paved in history as the worst person in the world. Whereas, that person is being judged at their most worst situation, their most worst act ever, which has turned out to be a tragic one. But what you'll find is that person is usually, a brother, a mother, a father, a family member, has a job, that's helped people, that's done all sorts of positive things. And in another dimension, they could be the victim of some crime, and the news would report that that person, oh, he was such a community member, he was a great person. And you can run that own test in your own life. You can stack up all of the worst things you ever thought, said, and done on one side, and then you can stack up all of the best things that you've ever done, you know, raise a child, protected someone, done this, done that. And you can put yourself on the scales, because you know yourself that as an individual, you're a complex person full of both good and bad. So I want to get away from this polarizing, yes, he's good, yes, he's bad conversation, and just make a hierarchy of these issues and say, we're going to put this one at the top, then this one, then this one. The one that right now should be at the top is the grooming scandal. Let's get to the bottom of that. We shouldn't care who gave us the message. If that thing is true, it needs to be investigated. And it's not just Tommy Robinson blowing the whistle on this. So we don't even have to focus on Tommy Robinson. Let's get to the bottom of that. The next thing that we should get to the bottom of is the fact that we have a multiculturalism issue in the UK right now. It's surrounding the immigration. It's surrounding a group within Islam that actively wants to, you know, have Sharia law around the world, which goes against the British values and American values that I've grown up in and understand and follow. And we should accept that there needs to be a line drawn to protect ourselves, even though the British society is an open and inclusive society. We have to agree on where we draw these lines in order to protect the culture which I've grown up in, which I've come to love, and which people do join and work faithfully in. My father is Nigerian. He was a secondary school teacher for 20 years. He assimilated into British culture. You know, he didn't bring his Nigerian culture into Britain. He changed the culture that he was in and lived to the standards of the place that he moved to. And that's how you have to look at immigration. So those two issues for me are the 1 and 2 of all of this that should be judged. Tommy Robinson should just, whatever his character is and who he is, should be some tabloid issue that is just sort of secondary, third, tertiary, that we shouldn't need to even focus that much on. It's not a big countrywide issue. And when you sweep things under the carpet, it forces him to become this big issue. And that's just unnecessary. We should just deal with things correctly in the first place. Then you wouldn't have this issue in the first place.
Sit with Robinson.
Yeah, well, I've been following the rape gang scandal for, I would say, 15 years, but the primary source of information for me in Canada has been Tommy Robinson and his insistence on pursuing this come what may.
And that's a net positive, regardless of what his character is. That is a net positive.
Was part of the reason that I looked into it, and I think that's probably the case for Elon Musk as well. And it's an open question how much of a monster you have to be to shrug off all the accusations and the reputation savaging and to put and the threats to your own existence and to your family's existence to sally forth regardless and bring these issues to public attention, you know, over a decade, let's say. And, you know, it might be wonderful for us to presume that the person who does that would also be of unimpeachable ethical character on all dimensions simultaneously. But we've seen the silence of people with unimpeachable characters in the face of this onslaught, and it doesn't bode well for them. So, and then the other thing...
That is a huge, huge point. For your world to be destroyed, what it takes is good people to be passive and not say anything and be quiet. This is why free speech is important. And this is why everybody should have a mechanism to call out something when they see it. Be it social media, be it X, be it conversations, whatever your platform of choice, YouTube, whatever it is, or just in your local community. We have to be able to call a spade, and people, good people, can't stand aside and leave it to those that have the balls. Because one thing you can say about Tommy Robinson is he's got a set on him.
I would say too, this isn't exactly in defense of Robinson. You know, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to weave my way through this. But there's another ugly issue here, Piers, that no one will grapple with, which is, you know, you described Robinson as anti-Muslim, let's say. Well, we don't really understand the relationship between the religious doctrine, let's say, and the fact of these crimes. Now, I want to make two cases here. You know, the first case is that 40 out of 50 Muslim majority countries in the world are authoritarian hellholes. And only 3 of them are democracies. And that's Morocco, Indonesia, and Turkey. And, you know, they're not, I wouldn't put them in the highest echelons of stellar states. And so why is that exactly? Is that a deviation from Islamic principles, or is it a consequence of them? Now, no one wants to have that discussion, and it's no bloody wonder, you know, and then
No one wants to have that discussion for real. No one wants to have that discussion for real, but it's a massive point.
And so that's on the negative side, let's say. And there are certainly doctrines in Islam that are very, very difficult to square with free, liberal, Western, Christian democracies.
And that's what I highlighted in my previous video, where there was a Muslim leader explaining that if a woman doesn't cover up, then she is subject to a test from God in the form of R word, which is what some of these grooming gangs people believe, which gives them the justification to actually go ahead and do these heinous crimes.
And those differences aren't just apparent, they're deep. Now, I would say on the optimistic side that we could turn to Islamic leaders like those who run the United Arab Emirates, and even to some degree now Saudi Arabia, and the signatories of the Abraham Accords, to find a different pathway. There have been stellar leaders, both from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who've come out and said that publicly, very publicly, that they've got their Islamic fundamentalists under control and firmly in hand, and are completely undiluted as to their danger. But Europeans are virtue signaling so hard on the progressive side that the fundamental danger from Islamic fundamentalism is going to come from Europe and the UK and not from the Arab states.
And we've actually seen the rise of that when ISIS happened, and just so many people, young people, I couldn't believe that would actually go and join the Caliphate ISIS fight. You know, it's just crazy to me that that came from the UK.
Now, Tommy Robinson has been pilloried as anti-Islam, but there's a discussion to be had here. And no one wants to have it. And, you know, you said we need a national inquiry. It's like, we need more than a national inquiry. We need something like an international symposium on the relationship between the Christian West and the Islamic world. Because there are ugly things afoot, and they've manifested themselves in the most hideous of all possible ways in the UK with regards to these rape crimes and the cover-up. But there's something that needs to be sorted out at the bottom of all this. And one of those is, like, you talk about moderate Muslims. Like, I looked up the polling data today that Winston Marshall, for example, referred to when he interviewed Nigel Farage. And, you know, it's about 3/4 of UK Muslims would be perfectly content if Sharia law happened to be the, what would you say, the principle of the day for the UK as a whole. And that it would be fine if Islam became the national religion. Now, that's 75%. So, you know, a cynic would say, okay, just exactly where the hell are these moderates? And at minimum, their voice needs to be amplified. And then we could also point out that the participation in these rapes by members of the Pakistani Muslim community, it was like 1 in 7 of the men in some of these communities was directly involved. And that meant everyone knew about it. Absolutely.
That is nuts. 1 in 7. 1 in 7. And Jordan is saying that everyone in their community would know about it if it's 1 in 7 people. And it's probably true.
Absolutely everyone on the Pakistani Muslim side. And the moderates were certainly, you know, silent and complicit. Now, obviously, so were the authorities. And so that's a complete bloody catastrophe for everyone involved. But there's a serious conversation to be had in the West, and particularly in the UK, maybe France and Germany in secondary place, about just exactly how it is that liberal Western democracies, with their emphasis on the rights of women, can live side by side with Islam in general, especially the sort of Islam that's transformed into enabling fundamentalism that allows this sort of criminality on the part of the psychopathic, resentful, psychopathic sadists.
So
I'm going to leave it there, but I think that is the massive point that Jordan has hit on there, is that we need to have discussions, we need to have actions, we need to have laws put in place that contend with the friction points of where religious fundamentalism encroaches on the liberties of the people of the United Kingdom, maybe the people of Europe, maybe the people of America. If that needs to be done on an international level, let it happen. It needs to be done on a country level at a minimum right now in the UK. And if this thing is not tackled properly, we're going to see these types of problems happening again and again and again. With that being said, thank you so much for watching the video. I'm sure you're going to put your opinions in the comments. I have no issue with that. But if you're a supporter of this video, if you're a supporter of this channel, please put balanced view, the term balanced view, in the comments to let me know that you're rocking with the channel, that you like the content I'm producing. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Thank you.